Welcome to A Time to Thrill. I'm your host, Aime Austin. This month, March 2022, I have the absolute pleasure and delight of speaking with USA Today and New York Times best-selling author Susan Grant. Two things you need to know about Susan. She writes epic romance, and she's a commercial airline pilot. I love books, reading, and travel, so this is one of my favorite conversations. I love talking to her. I haven't seen her, COVID. I haven't seen her in a while, but she lives actually in California, so we're in the same time zone, which is great. You'll love this interview. It's just so interesting. She's a pioneer in many aspects of her life. One, she was like in one of the first 3 or 4 classes of women at the Air Force Academy, as well as being a pioneer in writing in genre blending fiction. Back when she started publishing, the whole sci-fi romance wasn't a quote-unquote thing. I mean, it is now. I mean, I'm sure if you read that genre, you come across Ruby Dixon, who we talk about in this podcast, and even Theodora Taylor, who I interviewed earlier, has had a few very successful books in that genre. It's certainly an interesting space to be in, telling these big epic stories, as well as having a love story involved, or a romance. A love story is a different thing. A romance has a definite happy ending. So without further ado, I want to give you this interview with Susan Grant. And during the interview, she calls me Sylvie, which is my original pen name. I no longer write under. I write under Aime Austin only right now. But if you're wondering, that's who I am. Without further ado, I'm happy to share this conversation with Susan Grant. Good morning and welcome to A Time to Thrill. This is episode, I believe, 23, and my guest today is, well, so many things. Susan Grant. Hi, Susan.
Hi, everybody.
I was going to. So you're a Rita Award-winning, best-selling author of romance, or science fiction and romance, as well as a pilot. So how are you?
I am wonderful this morning. It's so good to be able to talk to you again.
I know I don't get to see people in person as much, obviously, over the last couple of years, which is just weird. But that said, I am back to traveling again. Are you flying?
Still able to stay home on a reduced salary. They offer it month to month, and every month it's available, I take it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's not going to be available for much longer, but it's like a practice retirement. I joked about it, and it's nice. I didn't. eh, There were situations with the airline pilots traveling where you would come into a country and you were put in a quarantine hotel, which is not like a regular hotel, and
Right.
the condition sounds awful, and you couldn't leave your room to exercise. And I said, I'll just remove myself from that for as long as I'm able to, and then return to work. I go
Right.
back for training and simulators. I've been back,
Mm-hmm.
and so but other than that, I have not done any trips since February of 2021.
Is that when the last one we were in Seoul? Was that the last? I feel like, but
And
I
yeah,
don't.
I think I was
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Seoul
yeah.
last. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So let's go back for everybody else. So Susan Grant is both an author, which is how I met her, and also a pilot. I love to fly so much. So I sort of love pilots because they take me places, and I don't have to do it myself. So how long have you been flying? Let's start there because I think you've been doing that longer than romance.
Oh yeah. Well, 1970 8, I entered the United States Air Force Academy as the third class ever to include women. So I got to, pioneer a bit then, and saw the last all male class graduate, saw the first women graduate. In 82, I graduated, went into the United States Air Force as a jet instructor, and then I flew a different sort of aircraft, and I did that till for 7 years. In 1989, I was hired by United when I got out. and I've been with them ever since, I guess, like 33 years or so.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so I've been doing it a very long time.
So can I ask you? So I have so many. I'm sure. Well, not maybe other people don't. I always have so many pilot
Sure.
questions because I only have you're one of the three pilot friends I have, and the other two have. No, I don't want to say have quit, but they have both moved to freight. One's at UPS and one's at whatever FedEx calls itself now.
Mhm.
Um, and that's been an interesting transition. What when you first started flying for United, did you fly domestic?
Initially, I flew as a flight engineer on a 747, so I flew international right away, and I did
Oh
that
wow.
for a couple of years. And of course, being a flight engineer, that job doesn't even exist anymore because now what I used to do manually, now computers do.
Right.
And so and then I flew domestically for about after that about 7 years, and then went back, and I've flown international ever since. I absolutely love flying international. It's just been the highlight of my career. I spent 20 years flying the 747, which is just, the queen of the skies, was such a
Right.
legendary plane. So,
Right.
I just have had I've been very timing and luck, and just, I've loved it.
So what well let me say this. What made you want to fly internationally? Because I have a friend whose dad flew for United for many, many years. Maybe 30, I don't know. But he only wanted to do domestic he did really short hops, but he did only wanted to do domestic flights. I don't know if it's because he wanted to come home not every day. I don't mean every day, but you know what I mean. He wanted to
Mhm.
be, or he wanted to do it less. I never actually asked, but what made you want to do international? Because I feel like they're two different kinds of pilots.
Yeah, there are, and I think some people who don't fly international are worried about it. They think they'll be so jet lagged. But all I can say is I've flown long days of domestic flying, and I would be more tired from those than I would be from international. But I just have, I think some people are just born with wanderlust, and they just want to see the world. I have a feeling you were too,
I
and
may be one of those people.
you may be one of those people. And so here was a chance to satisfy that love of travel and also get to do it as my job. And,
No.
yeah, so it was like perfect.
So I'm going to say this before I got on to do the recording. I was actually standing here because as I told you before I'm recording, I'm going to go to Panama City in 2 weeks, apparently, or less than 2 weeks. And I was, I was wandering around my kitchen thinking, if I like to travel, why did I never consider becoming a pilot? Because I'm going to be honest, the thought never crossed my mind. I don't have a reason as to why it never crossed my mind, but it never did. Although I think maybe now that I'm thinking about it, in the people of my age, most of them, I was told back then, I don't actually know if this is true, they either had to be in the military to learn how to fly or they had to do it, they had to self pay. Because I had a friend who paid, he eventually worked for the DoD
Correct.
later,
Correct.
but
Correct.
he had to
It's
pay.
still like that.
Oh, it is? Wow. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
it's slowly changing.
Hmm.
United Airlines now has opened. It's called the Aviate Academy, and I
Hmm.
hope somewhere with your listeners, someone has you know a child maybe who might be interested in this. It's a way they're trying to bring in the people, especially young women who may
Hmm.
not see pilots who look like them. And as we know, for a lot of people, this barrier is I don't see someone who looks like me doing that job, so I
Right.
must not be able to do that job, which is of
Right.
course false. And so this is a way to reach out to some of the
Hmm.
people who might not think, well, I'm don't picture myself being an airline pilot. I didn't. It is now. United Airlines has about 7% women, I think, which is the highest of any of the airlines of the world, as
Wow.
far as I know. So, around the world, it's very low, like 3% or something of all airline pilots in the world are female. So it's still, it has not really changed since I started flying for the airlines over 30
No.
years ago. It really it's crept up a little. So anyway, it's not surprising to hear you say it never occurred to you, because obviously very intelligent, you were in law, that's the
Right.
kind of brain that would kind of do well in the airline world. I have a lot of opinions on why more women may not do it.
Hmm.
Some are afraid that, oh, I have to be very technical. I have to be good at math and engineering. I was terrible in math. I still am. But I only need my 10 fingers. That's usually all the math I ever need. So,
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Actually, I'm good at math. I will actually now I'm gonna like not on on the mic, but I'm actually gonna think about it some because my son, who's also good at math, has thought about being a pilot because from the beginning he asked if we could go into the cockpit, and this is even after 9/11,
yeah,
and
I
and
love that.
and so we've been in a lot of cockpits, and he really loves the idea of it because he like, well, he's travels with me. So I don't know if he loves travel or he's just his life. And he's like, "Oh, you could have a job where you do this and you
Yes.
get to do like technical things." And I'm like, "Yes." Oh, and I did ask him this morning if he had one question. Oh, he wanted to know what percentage of it was autopilot. And what percent, like, how attentive do you have to be? Because he said that seems like a lot of hours of concentration.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Well, in the let
I mean, you're
I
not alone, obviously. Yes.
no, it's I fly. I mean, I fly. I've always done this. I will not put it on the autopilot until I'm up, at least like maybe above 18,000 feet. I want to fly the whole departure. I want to do that for my skills to keep my skills sharp. And then when I'm coming in for the approach, somewhere on the approach, I will, and I'm still some few thousand feet in the air, I'll take it off autopilot and do all that manually to keep the skills. But for that droning part, hours of droning, of
Yes.
course, it's best for everyone that it's on autopilot. It's a smoother flight for the passengers, and then you don't get so exhausted because you have a responsibility to not exhaust yourself.
Right.
So in case something pops up, you have to handle. So I'd say, like, especially the large middle part of the flight, the
Mhm.
autopilot is doing it, and the pilots will usually do the hand flying, that's what we call it, on the way up
Mhm.
and on the way down, but not the middle. You can tell him I think he should totally be a pilot.
I will. No, we were just talking about it this morning because I said, "Well, you see them walking back and forth. They go to the bathroom, they eat, they walk around." And then he was like, "Do you think they walk around for the whole like blood flow?" And I had never thought about it. I always think they're wandering around because like that, they got a lot of time. Um, and
Not the ones on duty. You're not saying walk around. You're probably saying the ones on break.
yes, I assume they're on break. I assume yes, but they do walk up and down the aisle. Look, I don't pay that much attention because I'm usually reading romance, but every so, every so often I look up and I go, "Huh, okay,"
Right. Yeah, well,
Um,
we wear compression hose, like, compression socks and other things too. On the long haul flights, like, you're on, so much,
mm,
you have to take some health, steps to make sure, nothing blood clots, nothing bad happens. But, yeah, it's good to get up and stretch, but, a lot of times I'll just do that in the cockpit, get up and stretch, and when I go on break, I'll walk a little bit, but yeah.
yeah, no, sorry, that was the morning follow because I was like, he was like, "Who are
Yeah.
you talking to today?" And I told him, and he was like, "Okay," I got questions, so thank
Always
you.
happy to answer his questions.
I know he does have many. Thank you so much for that. So what then? Okay, so I love travel and I love flying, but then romance. I mean, these are two, I will say this. Well, these are two things that I would not normally assume out of the same human being. So so what made you want to write romance? What possessed you to do that? I mean, we've all, well, not we have all. A lot of us either read it or I don't know, woke up one day and thought, let's try it. But not a lot of people I have learned as I've gotten older always go through and fulfill that. A lot of people start books, it turns out, or
Yeah,
think
yeah.
they think, yeah, I know, I had no idea, who think they want to do it. But what possessed you to like have the gumption to go do it?
I was I w I the stories I either made up in my head or that movies or stories I gravitated to unconsciously would have some, great epic adventure happening, but
Mm,
underlying it was also a developing romance between a couple of the characters, and that is, my favorite sort of well, this favorite story that I would like to do. Like, let's say, back when Star Wars came out, I
Right.
loved that adventure in space, but it was also cool with Han Solo and Princess Leia that they had this romance on the side sort of developing.
Right.
And so when I first had in mind to write a book, I never published the book because it wasn't. I learned after that book that it's better to write in a genre and then
Yeah.
write something that might sell. But it was an epic historical over many decades of a woman's life, and along the way she had her adventures and love, lost a first husband and married again, and it was just about a woman uh, um, going across country in the 1800s.
Right.
And uh, yeah, so that I wrote that, and then I heard about, well, you should pick a genre, like pick a lane, write in that. So I wrote a time travel romance about a woman, Navy fighter pilot, whose plane crashes in a storm. She's rescued by pirates. And the pirate is an ex nobleman, the pirate captain, and romance and adventure ensue. And I sold that, and the second one, um, uh, that I had started to write in a two-book deal. So it happened very quickly for me,
Mhm.
within about a year and a half after just say not even knowing where you put dialogue
Right.
quote, not knowing the basics, to selling the book. So I think I was a storyteller. I was always starting. Why romance? That just appealed to me.
So, okay, I have to ask you this because I did not get the pick a lane advice till maybe a few years ago. Who told you that early? Because that is honestly one of the best pieces of advice that writers can get. I have two lanes clearly, so I'm not. It took me a long time, and I'm really trying to focus like right now, going forward on one lane, and it's a struggle. But like where did you get that advice? Because it's literally the best thing.
I don't know, divine intervention. I found out about a writers conference.
Right.
And so I'm very, I don't know the word impulsive. I will just jump in. So I said,
Right.
I'm going to go to this. And when I went, I realized it was, romance centric. There's a lot of
Hmm.
romance writers there. And it was, there were agents and editors. And that's actually where I ended up getting my first agent, was through that conference.
Wow.
Um, and it, I think it may have been Melissa McClone. There's
Oh
a lot
yeah.
of people I met back then, like in the
Hmm.
late '90s, who are still around
Right.
and still writing. She may have said it, or it was just a group of people, and they kind of said, well, because they asked me what I wrote, and I told them, oh, it's a 600-page um, uh, epic historical about Polish immigrants, and they go, oh, okay, well, let's have a little talk. And so they spoke with me, and that's what they said, and I listened. So
Wow.
at that time, time travel romance was popular. So I said, so I wrote down the idea on a napkin on the flight home, which became my first published book. And it's still on Amazon, and it still sells, and it still does well.
Wow.
It's been recovered numerous times, but it's still there and still holds up.
That is such amazing advice because most of the people I know, and I've talked to writers about this, even a friend recently, where we went through all of these phases where we would go to, and this is like before, you're right, before Google. So how you
Mhm.
found out, I'd have to think about that part. But you'd go to writers' events and it would be kind of like generic or literary, or it was a hodgepodge that I went through. I was just talking to somebody about this today. Like when I first moved to Los Angeles, I went to these sort of, I don't want to say Bukowski-esque sort of writers where it was very like muscular, gritty LA writing,
Yeah.
and I was like, I've been reading these Harlequins, so this is like a whole different ball of wax. And I'm from the East Coast. It's not that I don't understand literary writing or those kinds of things, but I had read much more widely. And I was like, well, I'm going to write romance. And they're like, really? And I was like, yeah, really. But there was so much pushback initially until I joined RWA, but that was maybe 2008, something like, I mean, it was
Oh
later.
yeah, so that was Yeah, well
Yeah.
along.
Well
You were
along.
about 9 years, after me. I would think
Yes.
I joined in 1998.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's because I told someone what my Polish epic historical was about, and they said, "Oh, that's a romance." But it's kind of not really. It's a romance in the way a Danielle Steele or Nicholas Sparks is thought of as a romance, but
Right.
technically really isn't.
Right.
But what they meant to say was it was I wrote a book that had romance in it,
Right.
which is a big difference. And I never read Harlequins. I not even sure why I didn't even know they existed, but I think that that put me at a disadvantage as I had never internalized the beats of
Mhm.
a romance story, and so I just sort of maybe instinctively, but that's something I still um I'm just lucky I had some of it instinctively because I had more of a foundation in romance before I started writing it. So I just
S
stumbled into it, Sylvie. I just sort
Wow.
of what lucky. I just stumbled into the whole romance writing world.
So did you not so because one of the things that, most of the people I know who stumbled into romance I had a grandmother who I had more than one, but they both read a lot. One of my grandmothers
Mhm.
read, popular books, it was always oh my god, like just the whatever the popular fiction was, and so she had an entire shelf
Mhm.
of popular fiction from the 50s, 60s, 70s, as it went on. But my other grandmother had read well, I don't know, I never saw her. She had romance. She had like life magazines and romance novels. And she didn't generally didn't read when I was there, but I imagine when I was not at her house, she must have read them because she had many of them. And that's how I picked them up. I picked them up one day and read them, and nobody ever said anything. So I just kept reading them, and that's sort of how I got introduced because they gave me a feeling that was different than reading like The Boys in the Band or some like all these other books I read. Or and my other grandmother really was into like these really popular sort of books, but they were while they were engaging and gripping, and I still have some of them on my shelves after she died, they just didn't give me that extra jolt that I got from romance.
Right, I wish I had had that, um but I did not. So
Right,
that is just when you're saying it gives you that something.
right.
And I like there's I don't know, there's genres for everyone, and like of course
Mm,
you're writing in several genres, but
right.
there's I know, and that's why we read ultimately. We read for entertainment, and
Hmm.
that's why I never understand why some people put down certain genres, and of course romance is quite often, you
Right.
know, but denigrated, but you are essentially reading for escape and
Hmm.
for entertainment, and I feel like I'm an entertainer, storyteller,
Right.
and, that's what I want to do when people read my books, so
So what kind of books did you read growing up then? Or what genres, I guess is what I want to say.
I a lot of fantasy, like sort of
Uh,
Shannara, Terry Brooks, I would gravitate to that, but then I also gravitated towards anything where people were shipwrecked and ended up on, deserted islands. That was very,
like
that
Robinson
appealed
Crusoe,
to me.
yeah.
And, there was no dystopian fiction then to, you know,
Hmm.
that much of a degree, but I think if had I it been more modern times, I might have gobbled that up too. I also liked, science fiction stories that were end of the world, like the comet hits and almost
Right.
everyone dies, so you you helped me figure it out. I and then all that was what I was reading, and I
Hmm.
ended up writing romance. So I bring elements of those things into my romances.
Hmm. Do you know why you gravitated toward those? Well, I guess nobody knows what they I mean, I gravitated toward what happened was, I mean, obviously it was what was in the house, and then it was what was in the library, and then, your world gets broader as well, at least as I got older, I could go out on my own. But do you know what it was about those stories that sort of hooked you in?
Of the ones I read when I was growing up,
Uh-huh. Yes.
the escape and the being able to triumph over adversity, and I also like the unlikely hero
Mhm.
aspect of it, so you can picture yourself in that situation where everything is pulled away from you and
Right.
you're left to your own devices.
Right.
I really enjoy that you can still survive or find your way,
Mhm.
and when my parents would read from the library, I
Mhm.
know, but I never really looked. Their books were, I always remember them lying on their bedside tables, nothing I was ever interested in. So I would, yeah, towards, I was always gravitating to something with adventure or something far away from my life.
Okay. Where did you grow up? I actually don't know.
I grew up in New York,
Okay.
and it's a semi-urban area on
Mhm.
Long Island, and I always dreamed of escaping, and I
Mhm.
did. At, I just turned 18, and I said, "I'm out," and out of here, and I did. And then my parents eventually moved to San Diego not long after I left, so they went to the West Coast.
Wow, that's so interesting because so I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, but my father always
Oh,
wanted to
wow.
live in
Yeah.
California, but my mother did not agree, and then they got divorced. But they never. It was always California was this idea that people sort of talked about, um,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I ended up here. I came on a vacation. I was like, well, why don't people live here? And people are like, but we live in New York City. Nobody needs to leave. And I thought, maybe not.
So we have that's very similar. So we both get that. People
Mhm.
normally most of my high school friends, they're almost all still there except for the ones that went to Florida.
Right, exactly.
It's usually but that's sort of is to them it's the same. But yeah, it was just seemed like, yeah, California was this like ideal idea.
It wasn't a
Um,
huge idea that people talked about, but I mean, I used to call it New York inertia in my family. Like people talk about a lot of things
yeah,
and they
yeah.
travel, but they're like, I'm staying in New York because it's the biggest, best city in the world, yada yada, and I can't leave it. And I'm like, okay, well, I think you can, but and I did, and
Well,
yeah, I'm still the strange one. Well, she's
yeah,
out there.
pizza. We stayed for the pizza.
It was this idea, and when I came out here, I was like, well, this is interesting, but I wonder if there's something about writing that or reading early on that sort of expands your horizons, because that's one of the things about travel that I think got me interested. You had to read books and they'd be in London or they'd be in Paris or they'd be wherever, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
I got
me
to see that
too.
in person. I got to see
Me
that.
too.
Mhm.
Mhm. I think you've hit on that. It was like that wider, adventure of, uh, I wanted to read about things that weren't similar to my current reality,
Right.
right, I think that was, seeing things you wouldn't normally and opening up the horizons, right? Because I
So
was, and it sounds like you were, I just definitely read a lot, not necessarily what the other girls my age were liking or reading. I
no, I
would
mean,
be given
yeah,
those books, but like the Cleary books and other books, I
right.
can't really even remember, um, uh, all of those, but they didn't inspire me. They were kind of boring. So, I would be reading some different things.
I think so too. They're very domestically focused, and I don't actually. I shouldn't say this. I write books now that are very domestically focused. Ironically,
Mhm.
I don't write about travel ever, but they're very domestically focused. And I was like, well, that's very interesting that she's working out her teenage problems. But I want to know, like, what would happen if she like were in Paris? I wanted more of that, and those books I think actually probably inspired travel because I'm like, I want to see it myself.
My favorite thing is I would my layovers is usually I just have one night, maybe a part of a day, but I
Mhm.
will get there and immediately, I don't care when I last slept, get into clothes, to that sort of where I, like, blend in, I always sort of try to not stick out, and
Right.
I go try
Mhm.
and just go out with the sights and the smells and the sounds,
Right.
and I always try to find something to eat locally, like local food, and
Mhm.
just walk around and be out with the people, and, there's no way you can get that from, um, YouTube.
That's what I
It's the
said, but
experience of being there yourself, but
right.
everyone has a level of comfort. You and I might be comfortable doing that, and especially I have no problem eating alone in a restaurant in a foreign country, but for
Nope.
some people, they're not comfortable with that, and that's fine. Everyone has their comfort level.
Right. That's so interesting because I don't mind it. I'm like, get me off the plane. I'm landing in a few weeks. And all I can think of is, okay, so I'm going to land. Oh my God, they only had red eyes, which is a different conversation. So I'm going to land first thing in the morning. And I'm like, okay, so the first thing I got to do is like change my clothes and then go eat breakfast and walk around and
Yes.
I got to see, I got to see it all. Because I just want to feel it. And I don't know that I don't even
Mhm.
understand what that's about. So can I ask you okay, what's the first city that you traveled to? Like the first, I'm sorry, international city?
What was the first Oh, well, growing up, we ha eh we didn't have a lot of money, and
Mm,
so, I never even went on a plane until I was, like, I think 16,
okay.
the first time we went on airliner, so, of course, we didn't have the means to travel, but when I was United no, blah. Back in my Air Force Academy days, I went with my friend, and we went to Europe. So we must have landed in England. So England was first, the
Mhm.
first country, and then we just took the Ural got Ural tickets and went all over Europe. We did that 2 years in a row, for a couple weeks in the summer.
Oh, wow.
So technically, England was my first.
I think it
I
wasn't.
had
So
to
my
think way back on that one.
because I think Seoul's one of the best places I've ever been to. I really love it.
I was going to say that Seoul and, Taipei, Taiwan are, like, tying for 2nd place. I love that you love, Korea because it's I just like the people, the food, the sights. I love visiting there, and then Taiwan, of course, Taipei, I love the city, the feel of it, and, it's like when I say urban jungle, I'm meaning that the buildings just stretch up, and block out the sun because everything is so close together
Together.
with little
Yeah.
dark alleyways and plants that are sort of growing down the building. So it reminds me of like this urban kind of jungly place.
Do you travel then now? Well, okay, COVID notwithstanding, which is a whole different conversation. Do you travel independently of flying?
Oh, I do. We have sort of and it's our honor to do it, but
Mm,
we're the caregivers for my 97-year-old dad, so that
mm,
has got our wings clipped. For now,
right.
it's not as easy for us to travel, but, I mean, I'll go at a drop of a hat when I'm able to, and I love to travel on my own. Um, yeah, yeah,
Mm.
but it's been a while trying to think. It's been more domestically traveling, the past few years,
Yeah, I haven't. I don't.
but I love to travel on my own when I'm able to, and that's what I'm hoping to do in retirement in a couple of years is just, like, I don't even know I don't really want house plants. I just want to be able to I could just leave, and let's, go to Italy for a couple weeks. That's what I hope to do.
I'm laughing because I now have a single succulent because the number of times I've killed things because I'm gone, and even with like
Mhm.
sprinklers and people coming, I so many things have died. I was just thinking about it this morning. I was turning my single plant, and I thought, well, I guess that's the price I pay for being able to get on a plane. Like I
They
can't.
they have
I
some
can't.
great silk plants. I'm looking at one right now. I'm slowly letting mine sort of, like, die of the culling of the herd of of plants.
So let me ask you this: what made you decide to do the Air Force? Because okay, so there weren't a lot of women, obviously. And I was thinking of places I've been where there weren't a lot of women. I once went to this camp that had just switched from all boys for probably, I don't know, 60, 70 years to girls. And I remember we were staying in these cabins where they'd have one toilet and like a bunch of urinals. And I don't know, I assume they have modernized it. I'm not actually 100% sure. But I just remember being in a space that had never accommodated women before. And
Oh, yes.
while we were there, they were not accommodated. I wouldn't say like we were there, but they had not changed anything about it to accommodate us. I imagine that changed later. I was just thinking about it.
We are like the generation of women, I call it the philodendrons in urinals generation, and that they hadn't yet taken out the urinals, so you might as well use them. You could put plants in them, and that's what we did.
I can't remember
But
what we stored in there. I feel like somebody, well, later on, people
put
used to use them for drinking parties, but we'll get it. We'll skip that conversation.
you could put ice in them, right?
They
And then
did, yes. Ice and drinks because
yeah,
they hold it well and they don't drift.
that's so funny. Yeah, I've been in situations like that, and then I can't remember what was the question you asked me. I got
Oh,
sidetracked by urinals.
sorry. I was just thinking about it because we did it even like at Ivy League schools because they had obviously had all men. And so there were
Yeah,
lots
yeah.
of urinals and a lot of dorms and we used them for storage. But
Oh,
anyway,
I know what you asked. It was growing up.
yeah.
Why I chose the Air Force.
Yes.
Um, 4 years old, I can remember my dad, like, we were on the beach and he picked me up to point at some fighter jets that flew over, like a formation of fighter jets.
Hmm.
And I remember being thrilled about that. And then watching the Apollo space launches growing up. And then I wanted to be an astronaut, which
Oh,
was
wow.
so different from my life and the expectations of me. And I can't even begin to tell you the depths of how I was just not supposed to ever do any of those things,
Hmm.
but I did. And I've just, from almost out of the box, I wanted to fly planes and go into space.
Wow. Okay.
So,
So
yeah.
did you consider the astronaut track? I didn't think I don't
I
know.
did, but
Mhm.
I'm terrible in math. And they said, "Bye." I think I even applied to NASA, I think when I was a kid, and I had gotten that was my first rejection letter.
Oh
Well,
gosh.
you need to get a little more education, honey. But uh, I I couldn't, just because I you need an engineering degree, and I was not able to do it. I tried to
Mhm.
major in astronautical engineering, and I couldn't do it. And I it's hard to say. With I've had a great career that I settled, but I
Right.
sort of was at the step right below where I needed to be, to be in space, and I still haven't given up. Sort of, the clock is running out, but you always gotta
Yeah.
hope that United would start flying people to a space hotel, and then I could do it. But yeah.
So when you were in the Air Force Academy, were there what were okay? 'Cause when I went to school, I went to a school that was still majority men. I think now colleges and like graduate schools are maybe majority women, but like I was in a class that was like
Mhm,
I don't know 67, 70% men and
mhm.
30% women, and I didn't think much. Well, I thought, well, I'm not the only one, so to me that was that was better than being the only one. But you started off with it had to be a much lower percentage.
That was a microscopic
Mhm.
percentage, and, I'm trying to think. I think we did we graduate at a honestly, I can't recall some of the numbers. I think, in my graduating class of the academy, we started out with, like, 1,400. I think only 800 of us graduated,
Right.
and maybe there's, like, 75 women.
Wow. Okay.
That was sort of, I think they're up to like 25% women now at the Air Force Academy. But Sylvie, to this day, I go to my United training and I'll be in
Mhm.
a classroom full of guys. I'm the only female to this day. And so it's just bizarre that things have just not really changed. That's a whole other subject, and why we don't see more women in aviation.
Well, now that
But we
yeah,
don't.
but when you said it, when you were talking about internationally, I realized you're right. So I have only seen women pilots or anybody in the flight deck in the US. I have not seen it like on Air France or Lufthansa or
Mhm.
British Airways or I not certainly not JAL or anything. So now I'm thinking about it. I really have never. And I always listen because I'm like, maybe today will be the day. And it's not the day.
Mhm.
Today is not the day. Um,
No, you're looking at 3%, 4% at the most, and so it's just rare that some of them might be senior enough then to those international positions are the more senior,
right.
and so they have had to have been with the airline for a while to get there, and then that's even more rare. The farther back in time you go,
Right.
it was even less.
Although now, okay, I wish I had thought about this before we did this because now that I'm thinking about it, most of the women I've seen are on newer airlines, like newly formed airlines like JetBlue
Yeah.
or the red one. I'm sorry that they don't have anymore, Virgin America, or some of those. And those have been some of the ones where I've seen the entire flight crew be women. but and that's happened
Yeah,
a couple times in my life. Yeah.
I've never got. I mean, on the two-person jets, I've had
Right.
all-female crew, but, with the closest I've ever gotten, like, on the big heavies is 3 of the 4. So then we just give the camera to the guy to take a picture of us, and then it looks like an all-female crew.
No, I think you sent me one of those because I'm always quite interested because I'm going to be honest, I get on those planes and if women are flying, I think, oh, this is going to be good. I was like, because I don't know what they had to go through to get here, but it's probably a lot. And so
I always feel the same. I always relax a little bit. "Okay, they got
okay,
this."
okay, they got this. I do too. I'm like, oh, you really got this. I don't have nothing to do. Let me just go open a book. Um, but it's very interesting. So have you seen then? But have there been, I guess, a steady increase of women over time because you have a long
Yeah.
career?
Like, fractionally, like, just it just I have not seen a lot of change in 30 years, so I'm
Wow.
sorry to say. There's still I mean, I think that the Air Force has boosted some numbers, which is good. My
Mhm,
daughter graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2016, so she had a larger percentage
mhm,
of women, in her class than, I did, obviously, and, they, um, there were a lot of things that were a lot better. Um, and, but as the airlines go, it's just been a slow uptick, very slow,
mhm. That's
they're trying to always recruit, but there's got to be other factors going on. It does not seem to make sense that, on at the surface glance why there's so few. So there's a lot of other societal things going on. And it just maybe a lot of women just aren't interested or, but
that's so interesting. I'm gonna think about it. Now I'm gonna spend actually the rest of my day now thinking about it because there are
yeah.
certainly women who do flight attendants, so it can't be the schedule. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm going to be
Right.
gone 3 days or gone 4 days or have a turnaround that's super, super fast or something. So it has to be something else. Okay, I'm going to really think about it because
Right,
I
there's flight attendants, right,
right,
obviously, and so they're majority female, so it's
right,
not the schedule, it's not like they'll say, "Oh, family life," and I said, "But that doesn't make sense because flight attendants,
attendance. I know,
um,
and yeah,
are there." And, so, I mean, it would just be fun to sit and talk about this over a glass of wine, but I have so many, opinions, on
mhm.
it, but still it's tough, I think. But I think some of it is that it's an urban legend that you need to be good at math
No, and I think
and
yeah,
persist. So you do have to be good at STEM.
mhm,
And I wish I was better at STEM, but I'm not. But it's okay because the qualities you need to be a pilot aren't as th- like to think in 3D
right,
and to multitask and there's to be able to compartmentalize.
right.
These are skills that you need to be a good pilot that aren't necessarily something that you can contest for.
No, and I think women would have a lot of those skills, especially the
Yeah,
multitasking. To watch women make like
exactly.
lunch for kids and also do other things, and you're like, well, that's magic over there.
That's why we can be hearing, like, kids playing in one ear, but we could be concentrating on something with the other ear and I think that, anyway, that's why I always relax when I see an all-female crew. I say, "Okay, good. You got the multitasking down."
They got this. So I have a question for you about storytelling. What is
Mhm.
it? Well, let me say this. One of the things I noticed, and somebody had to ask me this question, I did not independently notice, but one of the things that someone had asked me is, what is the story that I'm trying to tell? Because apparently, like 25 books in, um, some consistent themes are apparent. I'll just say that. And I wanted to know if you think back on the catalog of books that you've written, what do you think like the primary theme is or the primary story that you think you're trying to get across?
I would like to call my books unlikely love stories, and meaning it's 2 people who are just it was never meant for these 2 people to fall in love.
Mhm.
And, that's a theme, a definite theme, and, eh, to defy the expectations, you're maybe not intentionally, but you're defying people's expectations of you,
Mhm.
of what you're going to do with your life and who you're gonna fall in love with.
Mhm.
and that is that I was thinking over my whole catalog, and
Mm.
even though I've written some very different kinds of stories, I do like that two people who were it was never meant to be
What do you think it
find
is
each other.
about that particular story that appeals?
Why does it appeal? Why does it appeal? Because I would say mostly instinctively that's a story that it entertains me.
Mhm,
It's just because I guess to me personally, my life has been about defying expectations of me. It
mhm,
always gives me that little feeling of victory, not
right,
in a smug way or anything like that, but just that I didn't, I did what I wanted to do,
mhm.
found happiness in that. Uh, but that is, I guess, it's a tough one. Why do certain things appeal to us? I've not really thought of the why part, only what I enjoy writing and reading.
Yeah, on the why, what I assume, and I haven't thought enough about it now that I think about it, is that I assume the why has to somehow plug into your life experience, your life
Yeah.
expectations, those kinds of things. Certain things that somehow just sort of get you, where you're just like, "Oh, it satisfies whatever I'm
Right,
looking
right.
for."
And I've never really, until you asked me the question as the why, I never really thought about that. I just know what I like.
Mhm.
And and there was a reader just recently who said, "I know when I read a Susan Grant book, what I I get is a strong woman with a sexy guy who backs her up."
I
And
love
s
that.
I love that because you're not getting the sexy guy who blocks her at every turn and they eventually, after a lot of high conflict, end up together. That would stress me out, that kind of story.
Mhm.
I I like I'd rather put the 2 people in together who are battling external things
Right.
blocking them rather than a lot of interpersonal conflict.
So what do
But
you read now?
I read, it's a big, it's a variety. I
Mhm.
mean, I'll read, psychological thrillers. I don't read as much in my, own, um the genre I write in as much, but I recently read a book that I absolutely loved, which it was called The Last Hour of Gann, Gann. It's like the book you would tell an author, "Don't write this book.
Okay.
Don't write it," and it's by, R. Lee Smith, and I it preceded all the books we have now, like all the Ruby Dixon monster books. It is a science fiction romance, but it's thank God she didn't listen to her editors or
Right.
critique partners, because the book is just, I'm saying, quote unquote wrong, and that it would go against all advice to write this book. I just couldn't put this like huge epic down. I actually
Mhm.
bought it in um, paperback just to put it on my keeper shelf, and
Right.
it's just so fantastic. Even if you don't even like science fiction, it's just so good. And the guy is a lizard.
Mhm.
He's like, I mean, on every anyway, a why that book just swept me away. Um,
Wow.
n and the heroine wasn't even, like, likable, but I just couldn't put the book down. How are these 2 gonna get together? What's gonna happen? Anyway,
So
that's what I
that's
like.
so interesting because I have not read that. So what kind of books are on your keeper shelf? I don't read epics anymore. I used to when I was younger. I don't know if I don't just have the attention span. I'm not sure. That's a different thought I have to think about. But what's on your keeper shelf?
Forgive me for not, having the titles at my
Mm,
ready memory,
that's
but,
okay.
like, the ones, like, I've read recently are just so varied. I think it was one called The Other Wife, and it was like a psychological thriller. There was another one about someone who met she was a restaurant owner, and the guy, the love interest in the story was a restaurant critic who savaged her restaurant,
Mhm.
and it caused her to, like, lose the restaurant. She had to fire all the employees, but it was just so great, and it took place, it was like in the Upper Peninsula, um I think Michigan
Mhm.
was it Michigan. Anyway, it was so different. And then the Lizard Man book, so it's just like they were so different. And so, what is the appealing thing of those? I like books that have food in them. That's a biggie. Food and travel,
Mhm.
and and unlikely love stories.
Right.
But then there wasn't any of those. Some of the other things I read aren't even romances.
So how do you choose? Because I don't I take whatever, if anybody recommends anything, I will read it. So that's, I don't
Hmm.
necessarily choose, it's whatever comes in the door. And sometimes I borrow books from the library and sometimes your book will come up and they're like, "Here's the book you requested." And I'm thinking, "When and why?" You know, I've no like who, what? And then I read it and I don't always remember who recommended it. And I think, okay, so I'm pretty open to almost anything. Um,
Yeah,
but I
same.
but I think when I like a love story that's a slow burn. Somebody recently had asked me
Hmm.
about that in the excuse me, thriller realm, and I was like, "Oh, you should read Julia Spencer Fleming." I was like, "He was married. She's a priest, and so the love story, obviously it took
Less
some
a
time.
slow burn.
That was very it's a very slow burn. And I remember like maybe book 3 or 4, they're sitting in a truck, I think these pickups or something, and they look at each other and I was like, "Oh, this is when they know." And it was just there's something, and it took like
Mm.
7 books. So I mean, and I was like, clearly I'm invested. But I don't know what it is about that like long period of time that appeals to me so much, which is why, well, insta love and romance is actually the thing that I think appeals to me the least. I like the idea that people have known each other or have been aware of each other for some long period of time. And they look up one day and they're like, "Wait a second," which is also why I love Friends to Lovers, those kinds of
Yes.
books.
Me
Um,
too. We have similar taste in that way. That's when I agreed to do a project on in the Fated Mates Alien Romance. No, it was novellas
right.
for the Intergalactic Dating Agency. I accepted it because I had been coming out of a period where I was not feeling like I was able to write,
Hmm.
and it broke me out of that. But it was just a true exercise, creative challenge to make a book that I would want to read out of a genre that I typically don't read.
Right.
And that was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad I did them.
Hmm.
And I'm working on one now, just doing one more of those. Some sort of doing working on some different series. So, but yeah, it's you can take some genres that you may not normally read or write and do them and put your own spin on them.
No, I love that because I do follow authors. I'm the person who will read an author across genres because I love, some people have a certain way of storytelling that I like
Yes.
separate and apart from the stories they tell. Actually, Tana French is one of
Yes.
those. So she just wrote a book that people are like, "Well, that's slow or it's not enough of a murder mystery." And I was like, "But her handle on interpersonal relationships, I really love. I don't even know how to explain it. I just love that about her books. Not the stories, the last two, the stories, I don't know, but I love the interpersonal relationships and I read it for those interactions
Yes. You're
very
right.
specifically. So, what are you writing? Well, let me ask you this. First of all, how many books have you written? Because I always ask people, because it's always amazing to me that people are able to write so many stories.
Well, I 20s. I'm like towards. I think I'm getting like I don't know mid 20s,
Hmm.
something like that. And I definitely haven't been as productive as many. But then
Hmm.
I've also had this whole other career
You
in
do,
kid
yes.
raising as a single mom, and so that had few things taking my time.
Right.
And eh, but yeah, so it's in for unique works. I think I'm somewhere in the mid 20s,
And so,
and yeah.
what are you working on now, actually?
I am working on book 3 of my Skymate series. It's like a takeoff on Top Gun. What if we had sometime in the future we had Top Gun school on Earth, but it was for aliens too. And this is a spin-off of one of my series where Earth has joined in a galactic alliance. So it takes place in Texas. So you talk about things you're not supposed to do. I'm mixing, you know, cowboy romance and with science fiction romance,
Right.
and in little action-packed novellas, but it's like a fated mates, where there's actually a DNA resonates and it's the fated mates. So it's but it's yet it's not insta love. It's that, you know,
Right.
but you're gonna try to say no, no to that. That can't be. This is the totally wrong person that this is supposed to be happening with.
Right.
I want my money back. But anyway, that so I'm writing the third one. They're a little bit more than the novella size, and then after that, I'll continue on with my Borderlands series, which is like space opera, galactic treasure hunting. There's a woman admiral. It's like ongoing characters that I absolutely I feel creative energy in that direction right now. So I'll go back to write the next one in that series.
That's amazing.
And then yeah.
Yeah, I will say this because I was thinking, but you have had a lot of success in a genre blending space
Yeah.
from the beginning. So that's very interesting. Considering most of the people I know have written either contemporary or historical or whatever that the very narrow are, but you have been able to combine that successfully for a long time.
People would call my science fiction romances like the gateway books into science fiction romance. People who said, "Oh, I'm not going to read a book about an alien," will read one of mine. And this has happened across the board. There are many successful authors now who, in the science fiction romance genre, that it makes me feel old, but they'll say, "Yeah, I started reading your books when I was a teenager under the blank with a flashlight." And I said, I'm going to write these, and are now like, burning up the charts, and
Right.
and so I feel like I was help pioneer the genre a little bit, because the book I wrote in 1998, what I Star King, that I sold then, before paranormal was even hitting it, and vampires were just barely a little blip, and it was a 43-year-old divorced mother of two,
Mhm.
as then it's a love story with her and an alien king in exile,
Right.
that how they meet. And so, but it actually sold, and it's still, it still sells, so it's kind of crazy.
As a person who's a pioneer, being a pioneer is two things. It's being first, but being first is not always, the best. It's sometimes better to be second. But how do you feel having been a pioneer in two different careers? Because you're, yeah, it's really interesting
It
having.
I always would say, like in Air Force stuff, I was never like the first wave. I was
Right.
like the second wave. I was right behind that first breaking wave, which I actually prefer. Then they let them kind of do a little bit of the but I'm right there,
Right.
behind. And it's like the same thing with pioneering in some romance genres. There were already, that first wave ahead of me doing it, but I was right there,
Mhm.
in the beginning. Um, and I don't know, I didn't think about it. I just do what I want to do.
Okay.
And it's, trying not to take it to heart when to hear, "So no, you can't. No, you can't."
Right.
That usually gets, me going, like, "Yeah, I can."
I know, and I think there's two kinds of people. Well, there's probably more than two, but some people who are like, "No, you can't." And they're like, "Well, I'm going to do it anyway," and "No, you can't," who turn away, and that's always
Yeah,
it's the turn away
yeah,
people that I worry about the most. I'm like, "But you can," and they're like, "But they
I
said
know.
no," and you're like, "But that doesn't mean." It doesn't mean no forever. It doesn't mean no. It's just one person or just one company or just one editor, whatever it is, and want them to push beyond that. But I do know some people really do take no to heart and then pivot.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I know it too, but then some people, that's okay, if they can find success in they can find their yeses
Right.
and be very content.
So if you okay, let me ask you this. If you had not done the pilot thing, what do you think you would have done?
I loved filmmaking when I was in high school, and I honestly really thought that's what I was gonna do. I wanted to, um, uh, I probably would have ended up working for, George Lucas or something in those early days of uh, eh, some of the where the filmmaking was going
Yes.
then. I would make animated movies, the claymation, that's where my passion was. I was, like, in art major, and of course I love creative writing,
Right.
but I had this space love, and so that
That took over.
but I just felt like I was at a fork in the road, and I chose, uh, where I'm the aviation route. But I could have easily gone into the filmmaking. Had I not gone into the Air Force Academy, I may have ended up in filmmaking, because at the Air Force Academy, when my engineering degree didn't work out, I mean,
Mhm.
we all had bachelors of engineering, but I was
Right.
able to switch to a general studies major
Right.
and then start doing well in academics. So it allowed me to graduate from there and, continue on. But had I gone to the University of Illinois and majored in astronautical engineering, which was what I was going to do,
Right.
had I not gotten accepted, I knew there was no way I was gonna survive that. I didn't know, and so I don't know what would have happened.
But I feel like storytelling. So I think at the end of the day, maybe then the answer is storytelling of some kind. Um,
Storytelling of some kind, yeah.
because I do find that the older I get and the more people I meet who are authors, or I live in LA, who are storytellers of some kind in whatever, whether it's screenwriting or TV writing or whatever it is, they've always wanted to do that. And it became sort of the industry that the industry that they ended up in. They did the same thing, but whether it's like 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 2 hours or 200 pages or whatever it is, it's the same idea, just a different form.
Yeah, that's exactly. It that was right. It's just the storytelling or entertaining or however it is. Um, a few days ago, I was worried about, I'm struggling with this book right now. We all have those books that
Mhm.
just, for whatever reason, kill us. They don't want
Be
to write. And you
I
have to
know.
you're wrestling with them. And I said, well, if the apocalypse comes, I'll be mad because I've put so much effort into the story and it'll never get to be published. I said, but then I'll just tell it around the fire for generations to come. So,
That's so
so I
funny.
haven't even had an alternative. If the world ended, I was gonna tell the story anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm working on one of those books that's it has been I started it last August, and every day it's a trial. And I don't know why. Like it's not
Right?
I ju- I've only had a couple books that sort of wrote themselves, where I just sat there and wrote, and I wish they were all that way. Like I have
I
such a
know.
desire for them all to be that way. But I'm in a struggle book now, and it's
Oh,
70% done. That's all I'm gonna say. It's 70% done.
I'm wishing you luck with it. All I can say is I really empathize and can relate. Hey, let's switch books.
I know.
We'll put let's see. Just give me where you're at, and I'll give you where I'm at, and we'll see.
I will say this one thing. I'm always waiting for the magical gnome. Like I always think I'm going to wake up one morning and somebody will have finished the
Me
book. And I'm
too.
like, oh, look at the magic that happened overnight. But it doesn't happen. I'm going to open it today and it's going to be like, oh, you left her sitting on that futon. Well, what's going to happen now?
Hey, do you ever get where in the middle of the night you decide you actually have the solution and you say, I'll definitely remember this, and you don't write it into your phone, and when you wake up in the morning you don't remember what it was? Yeah,
Yes,
that's
and it never happens anymore. So I'm going to be honest, like this book, that's a struggle. I woke up maybe
yeah.
3 days ago at
Oh,
4, and I was like, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get up, because I lost some. I still think about this to this day. I have a book where I lost part of it, and I'd never been able to recover it. I still think it's probably the most brilliant idea I ever had, and I didn't write it
oh,
down. So, but 99% of the time, I will wake up. It's awful. I will wake up to do it, because it's more important to me to get it done than it is for me to go back to sleep. And I usually
yep.
can, yeah. And I accept that so, as a
I have that.
consequence.
I see you say somewhere like on your Gallup strengths, your discipline is pretty high.
It's number 2. So yes.
Yeah, well, mine is down in the 20s, but it's actually, I had my strength 23, but strategic is my number 2, but
Oh, you and Maggie. Oh, I don't
yeah,
understand it. Yeah.
it can torment, but it's a a blessing too.
This is what I hear. I don't strategic. I think maybe whatever the number 20, it's above woo, but that's the second to last for me. So that's
Woo is
not,
low also.
I don't even, every time I look at that, I think I don't understand what's going on over there, but I'm going to go do the same thing every day because that's what I know how to do. And so that's what I just do to get ahead. I'm like, I just do the same thing every day. Uh, and
Well,
that,
I think that's a lot of people I know who are in law are very disciplined writers, very successful because I don't know. I don't know if something in the career attracts people who do have higher discipline. I think it requires it,
I think it
you know.
does. Yeah. I think
And
you can't
so I
be.
just noticed that with a lot of the authors who are in law.
Yeah, so I know a lot of lawyers who became writers, but I don't but the law does not seep a lot of artists out of it. And the
Hmm.
people who leave, I notice the people who stay are the very like discipline focused logic people who don't have that other part niggling at them. And so it's
Yes.
always very interesting. I'm like, oh, okay, well, some of us left because we needed to express this other part, but I can see I understand the discipline and I have no problem like with law. It's like this needs to be due and you have to show up here. And I could do it with no problem. And I never understood people who didn't have a problem until we did the Becca Syme thing, where I learned that other people had different kinds
Right.
of brains. And I was like, oh, I never thought about it. I
Which is
thought, yeah.
It's so fascinating. You asked, I think, because I'm a pilot and how I am doing this writing.
Mhm.
And I think that it comes down to um, you and I both are, and we know a lot of other people who are left brain, right brain. There's not so much one side is so dominant.
Right.
It's more of a shared. And that's who you get people like us, pilots who write,
Mhm.
and lawyers who are
No,
writing fiction.
it's one of the things I love the most about the romance community, and we've talked about this. I mean, off here, where
Hmm.
you like we're sitting in this room, and people just have the most fascinating jobs, where which
Hmm.
is which is clearly like a left brain job, especially like the epidemiologists we know,
Yes, yes, exactly.
and
I
I'm
was
like,
thinking of her.
yes, and I was just like, okay, and also, you write romance. So I think I love that about this community that it has these women who are super smart and the ability to do both things, which I think is necessary for a successful indie career and writing career nowadays, probably. And
Yeah.
no matter how you're published, to be able to like manage the marketing and all these other things that are really quite left brain things, as well as tell a good story. And I think it's something that you do amazingly, and a lot of women in this community do amazing. And it's what I love about it the most.
Yeah, same here. I'm just I love being part of this community and just it feels small. It's not small, but it feels small and just great women that you and so many others inspire me.
No, thank you so much for speaking. I love to talk to you, and I think that you have the most fascinating life, and I want to share that with my
Oh
listeners.
my gosh.
All right,
Thank you so much.
all right.
All
Have
right, sweetie, you
oh,
have a good rest of your day and you let's hope we can beat our books into submission.
also that,
I
also
know.
that. I'm
And
gonna
also that.
also that. All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. This has been A Time to Thrill with me, your host, author Aime Austin. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll share it, rate it, and give it a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Reviews will help other listeners find my conversations with brilliant creators. Also, please hit the follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I am the author of the forthcoming Nicole Long series of legal thrillers. Outcry Witness and Major Crimes are available for pre-order. I'm also the author of the Casey Court series of legal thrillers. They are available wherever books are sold, at your local library, and also an audiobook. You can follow me on Instagram at ThrillerPod or on Facebook at Legal Thriller Author or at A Time to Thrill. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next month with another great conversation.